All right, so welcome to, I believe it's the fourth lecture that Ed Gordon has given for the Cliff Dwellers. Ed is a historian, speaker, researcher, and author. He's taught history at DePaul University in Chicago and was a distinguished lecturer for the Organization of American Historians for 10 years. He has presented hundreds of historical programs across America to museums, libraries, universities, historical societies, professional groups, trade associations, alumni organizations, and community groups. Ed is also the president and founder of Imperial Consulting Corporation. His latest book, Divided on D-Day, How Conflicts and Rivalries Jeopardized the Allied Victory at Normandy, co-authored with David Ramsey, was published by Prometheus Books. Dr. Gordon earned his BA and MA degrees in history at DePaul University, his PhD at Loyola University in Chicago, and pursued postgraduate studies at the University of Chicago. He has been a literary member of the Cliff Dwellers since 2000 and has given us many wonderful programs, live and now in Zoom. So Ed, if you'd like to start, anytime.
Well, tonight, we're going to talk about one of the most important turning points of the Second World War. In July of 1940, Winston Churchill spoke these memorable words to his people about a month after he had become prime minister. The Battle of France is over. The Battle of Britain is about to begin. Upon this battle depends the survival of civilization. Hitler knows that he will have to break us in this island or lose the war. If we can stand up to him, all of Europe will be free, and the life of the world may go forward in broad, sunlit horizons. But if we fail, then the whole world, including the United States, including all that we have known and cared for, will sink into the abyss of a dark age, more sinister and perhaps more protracted by the lights of a perverted science. Here is a composite picture of what a victory parade in London might have looked like if the Nazis had won. So let us brace ourselves and go forward to our duties, and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and the Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, people will still say, this was our finest hour. This past Sunday, the British celebrated the 80th anniversary of their victory of the Battle of Britain. Here are Spitfires overflying Westminster Abbey last Sunday. We are about to tell you this heroic story of how the British stopped the Wehrmach and gave Hitler his first major defeat of the war. So first, let's set the stage. On May 10th, 1940, the Germans attacked the Allied troops made up of British, French, and later both Dutch and Belgian forces. What the Allies had not conceived was that the Germans would attack through the Ardennes forest and cut off the British Expeditionary Force and a large part, the best units of the French army. The Maginot Line, which you see in that dark line.
Ed, we're not seeing your screen.
Oh, you're not? Oh,
no.
Dear.
There we go. There we go.
Okay.
I think.
All right.
All right. But
you see it now?
We're not, no, we're seeing your, yeah, we're not seeing your presentation. Do you have your presentation open?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Then you want to find it and click on it.
Yeah. All right. Just a second. Come here. You do it. I don't know what to do. Just a second. I'm sorry.
We got to get your IT guy there, right? Now we're seeing your email program here.
Okay, wait a minute. Let's see. Is that no? Yeah. We may have to end. Let's try it again.
All
You
right.
gotta bring your PowerPoint up.
Yeah, I know, we did.
Up on your
It didn't
computer,
work. Well, we'll see now.
and then click on share screen, and it should be one of your options.
Okay.
All right, we're gonna
Maybe that's what we didn't do.
All right, we didn't do share screen.
Yeah.
We didn't do that.
Okay. No, wait a minute. Unfortunately. Now we're getting the wrong one. Oh dear. Let me try again.
Right.
Okay.
Ask them if they see that.
No.
No, we're seeing
You're still
Elaine.
You're still
Okay. Unfortunately, I'm only can get it
Here we
this
go.
way. Unfortunately, we're gonna have to do the smaller one.
All right. Okay.
Why? We can't do it's not showing the other one.
Okay, let's just go back.
You're up and running.
All right, just a second. Let's,
Do you want to put it on the slideshow so we're just seeing the slide? Because we're seeing also the side, we're seeing presenter view. We want,
I can't see it.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, wait a minute. Okay, now do you see us?
yes, perfect. Now you're perfect.
Okay.
Yes.
There we got it.
Okay, well, now there's Churchill. You heard his word. You heard what I said, right?
Yes.
Okay, so there he is giving his speech. Nazis began bombing. That's what it might have looked like. All right, there's the flyover that was on Sunday for the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Britain. Here's the invasion of France. You can see the red arrows. The German army cut through the Ardennes forest, cut off the British and French forces in Belgium. The Maginot Line is that dark line from the Belgian border all the way down to Switzerland. The French forces were basically marooned in that line. The Germans broke through at Sedan on May 13th, and by the end of the month, they had cut off the French and British and caused them to begin a evacuation at Dunkirk. And between May 26th and June the 4th, 338,000 British troops were evacuated. 32 Spitfire squadrons maintained air superiority over the Channel. And it was mastermind first, Churchill requested it, and Admiral Sir Bertram Ramsay was the man in charge of the evacuation. Even though it was successful, you can see what happened to the British Army's equipment. 90,000 rifles, 2,300 pieces of artillery, 120,000 vehicles, tanks, 400 anti-tank guns. The British Army lost all of its equipment. There's the slide. Okay. I have a slide. All right. Now, in 7 weeks in the Battle of France, the RAF lost 67 aircraft. 14% of the aircraft they deployed, of over 400 planes, were shot down, which was a very high number since they knew that the Germans would invade or try to invade Britain, and they needed all those aircraft. On June the 14th, the German army marched into Paris, had a huge victory parade. The French pleaded with the British to give them all the rest of their aircraft. The British refused because they knew they needed at least 25 fighter squadrons to defend Britain. Because here is Scapa Flow, there's the British home fleet. They knew the Navy alone could not prevent the invasion. They had to maintain air superiority over the Channel so that between their bombers and the British fleet, they could sink whatever German invasion fleet was sent against them. In June of 1940, the Germans had an Air Force superiority over the RAF of about 5-1. Earlier in 1938, here is Neville Chamberlain. He's holding up a piece of paper saying, "It's peace in our time." This is the Munich Agreement. Hitler signed a worthless piece of paper that continued the Allied policy of appeasement while Germany rearmed. However, the British did build the Spitfire. In his book, The Gathering Storm, which was one of the great books of the Second World War, Winston Churchill insisted that the Brits had to rearm their Air Force. He was the principal reason to push for the development of this high production, high quality fighter. On June the 17th, here is Keitel and the French army, and the French are surrendering to them in Compiègne. In the same railway car, on the exact same spot in 1918, where the Germans surrendered. That soldier standing in the door, Hitler had been sitting next to Keitel during the surrender. The Germans didn't trust the French, and Hitler was afraid of assassination. That man standing there is armed to the teeth. His orders were, if the French tried to attack Hitler, he was to cut them all down. Well, the Germans, the French, everyone now expected that Britain would surrender. Because why? Well, here's one of the propaganda posters. This is the bombing of Coventry. But everyone thought the Brits would be helpless. The commander-in-chief of the French army, General Maxime Weygand, on June the 16th, he observed, quote, "In 3 weeks, England will have her neck wrung like a chicken." Well, here's Hitler at Compiègne, the day of the surrender. He also thought the Brits would seek an armistice. In fact, he liked the Brits. In fact, he thought that the English were part of his crazy Aryan race theories. They were related to the Germans. On July the 19th, he broadcast a speech in which he offered Britain terms. Well, you think the British were going to believe him after the violation of Munich, after his attack on Poland, after his destruction of France in 6 weeks? Of course not. The German army, however, never had prepared any plan to invade England. It was simply not something that the Germans thought about. Well, what did Churchill say in response to Hitler's speech? You ask, what is our policy? I say it is to wage war by sea, by land, and by air, with all our might, with all the strength that God gives us. You ask us, what is our aim? I can answer in one word: victory. Victory at all costs. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory, however long and hard the road may be. For without victory, there is no survival. We shall not flag or fail. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in the oceans, the seas. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We will fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the street. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. That picture of the War Cabinet Rooms you saw a moment ago is in London near Horse Guards Parade and is open to view and has the underground headquarters for Churchill and the British Armed Forces, and also a museum on Winston Churchill. There were many, many people, including Lord Halifax and his cabinet, who wanted to actually sign an armistice with the Germans. But Churchill's speeches were indicative of his ability to galvanize the British people to resist the Germans, and he persuaded his cabinet not to negotiate. Well, now let's look at the German plans for invasion. Here is Hermann Göring standing at the nearest point, 20 miles, that moat. You can see on the horizon, faintly, the white cliffs of Dover. It was all that separated the British from the victorious German juggernaut. Churchill rallied his nation with the immortal words of Shakespeare: "This fortress built by nature for herself against infection and the hand of war. This happy breed of men, this little world, this blessed plot, this earth, this realm, this England." Adolf Hitler's Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, confessed in his diary he had a new respect for Churchill. This is what he said, quote, "This man is a strange mixture of heroism and cunning. If he had come to power in 1933, we would not be where we are today. And I believe that he will give us a few more problems yet. But we can and we will solve them. Nevertheless, he is not to be taken as lightly as we usually take him." The Germans considered trying to assassinate Churchill, and they tried to do it with his cigars. Now, you know that Churchill loved to smoke cigars, and he received gifts from citizens, foreign emissaries all over the world. At one point, he received an entire chest filled with Havana cigars from the president of Cuba. He showed them to his ministers at a cabinet meeting, and he said, "Gentlemen, I am going to try an experiment. Maybe it will result in joy. Maybe it will end in grief. But I'm about to give each one of you these magnificent cigars." He handed out all the cigars. The men lit them. They all survived. A week later, however, John Colville, his private secretary, found out he had had the cigars tested by MI5, the British Secret Service. He told Churchill, "I hope that you will not smoke any more of these until all of them have been tested." He pointed out at that time there were a huge number of Nazi agents and sympathizers all over Cuba. Here is a map of Operation Sea Lion, Hitler's plan to invade Britain. 100,000 men in the first wave, 150,000 men in the second wave. The invasion would be launched from the Netherlands and France, landing, as you see, along the southeast coast of England. You can also see the parachute units that the Germans would employ. By mid-July, 4,000 invasion craft had been assembled. Here's one of them. You see they're practicing landing in France. By the beginning of September, the naval staff was able to report that they had 168 transports, over 1,900 barges, 419 tugboats, 1,600 motorboats, and 1.5 million tons of seagoing shipping. They were ready for the invasion. D-Day was set for September 24th, 1940. But for the invasion to succeed, the RAF would have to be swept from the skies by these planes, the Messerschmitt 109, so that they could land around Dover and near Dover. Hermann Göring, this was his day. Thus far, he had been invincible. This was a battle, but it was a battle in the skies over England and the Channel. Let's look at the antagonists. Well, here's friendly Hermann with some of his pilots at a French airfield during the Battle of Britain. The Germans deployed 2,500 aircraft, 980 fighters, over 1,400 bombers. The Messerschmitt 109 was a high-performance aircraft that thus far had shot down practically everything sent against them across Europe. They also had twin-engine fighter planes and bombers. These are medium bombers. As you'll notice, they only have 2 engines. The Heinkel 111 and the Dornier 217. And then this is the flying piece of artillery, the Stuka dive bomber. In the latter phases of the Second World War, the Germans would develop this Condor 4-engine bomber, mainly used against convoys as they approached England, a higher performance, faster Focke-Wulf 190. And here is a picture of the ME 262 jet. But in 1940, they lacked these aircraft, which was, of course, a major reason why they lost. Let's look at the other side. Here's Air Marshal Hugh Dowling, who is in command of the British air defenses. The Spitfire was his principal weapon, a match for the ME plane, and the Hurricane. Before the war, as the British saw it, the Germans possessed the ability to bomb England to the point where it would have no other option to surrender. But what they found out was that fighters alone would in no way win the war. Though Churchill believed they had enough aircraft, England might be able to hold out at bay and stave off an invasion long enough for the United States to enter the war. When Churchill became prime minister, he appointed Lord Beaverbrook to head the production of these fighter aircraft. Beaverbrook was a newspaper tycoon. He was a tough cookie. He kicked ass. He broke down the British bureaucracy. He did things that people hated him for. But he produced a tremendous number of aircraft during the Battle of Britain and afterwards, and was one of the principal reasons they won. What kinds of bombers did the Germans have? Well, they too had a medium 2-engine bomber. And later in the war, they also developed this, the Lancaster heavy bomber. Now, we had the B-17 that we used bombing Germany during the day. The British used these Lancasters that were twice the bomb load of a B-17 to bomb Germany and Europe at night. Let's compare these planes for a minute. There in the front is the Spitfire. Behind it is the ME 109. The German plane was faster, had a better rate of climb, but the Spitfire was more maneuverable and was better armed. Now, the German bombers were tactical bombers. What do I mean by that? They were designed to support ground troops. They were designed to bomb obstacles that would stop the advance of the Blitzkrieg, of the German armored divisions. They were not designed for strategic bombing. They had too small bomb loads. Also, they had a very short range in fuel. The German fighters also lacked fuel range. 80 minutes, that's it. But remember, their idea was to have the airplanes right behind the front, and as the Army advanced, their airfields would advance with it. Now, it's interesting, one of the secrets of the Battle of Britain that most people don't know is that the Germans had developed the ME-109 for the Spanish Civil War. They tried it out during the Spanish Civil War. And for that war, they had spare fuel tanks that they used in Spain to extend the range. No one understands why they didn't do that for the Battle of Britain, because this is one of the big limitations they faced. All right, let's now go to the beginning of the war of the Battle of Britain. Operation Eagle Day, August 13th, 1940. Here is a German airfield in France. You see the bombers lined up. The Germans over the previous week had launched lesser attacks against British coastal radar stations, but on this day, Göring was going to blacken the sky with his might, his aerial might, to stun the world. The idea was he would launch 2,500 aircraft against Britain that day, including over 1,400 bombers and 1,000 fighters. At last, he would show Hitler and the world that what his Air Force could really do. Well, now here's a map of Britain. The bombing would come mainly from France. Some of it actually even came from Norway. I want you to look at the map. Look at 11 Group. That is the critical area that they needed to control, because most of the invasion would land along that coastline. So 11 Group is part of the RAF. This next map shows you the German attack on the coast, but also look at what they did. Now, they were basically attacking shipping, the coastal shipping and seaports, and then they were attacking the radar stations. The British had developed new radar capabilities. They had 52 radar stations like this all along the coast. And they had a fighter control where all that data was brought into. They were then able to concentrate and direct their squadrons against individual German attacks. This gave them an absolutely tremendous advantage that the Germans had not faced in the invasion of Poland or in France. On August 12th, the Germans bombed and knocked out 3 radar stations, but they didn't follow up with more attacks. If they had knocked out more of them, they might have won the battle. By August 15th, the first Germans had faced their defeat. The losses, 148 Brits, 286 German planes. Now, among the pilots was their ace, Alfred Galland, who would become the head of the fighter command for the Germans, and one of their star pilots who actually survived the war. He found the Battle of Britain a rude awakening. He only had a 90-minute flying time, and a lot of that was lost in organizing the flyers over France to then fly into England. The fighters actually had an operational range of only 125 miles, roughly the distance to London. Everything beyond that was out of his reach. He likened the German fighters to being a dog on a chain. Quote, who wants to attack a foe but can't harm him because of the limitations of his chain? Well, let's move to August 24th to September 5th. Now here is pictured all of the British RAF fighter bases in the south. And there you see on the coast of France, the Germans. The Germans' plan was to attack and destroy all those bases in southwestern England in order to establish air superiority over the Channel. Because again, if the home fleet steamed into that channel to attack the German invasion force, the Luftwaffe would sink them. The Germans had the bombers, and they were right on the coast, and the home fleet would be destroyed. I'm sure the Germans would have lost shipping too. But by September 1st, many of those bases that you saw on that map were useless. The hangars, repair shops, operation buildings, the communication facilities, they were all leveled. Of 11 Group that you had seen on that map, 7 of the fields, basically 6 of them had been demolished, and 5 other advanced fields were basically also knocked out. This great damage at the same time, of 6 of these radar sector communication and control centers, where they would be directing the RAF fighters, were also destroyed. Dowding's aircraft reserve was shrinking. In the last 2 days of August, the Nazis reached a crescendo of 2,800 raids on that part of England. And again, their primary targets were 11 groups vector stations in that part of the country. Churchill went and saw the men and talked to them. He gave his shortest speech he ever delivered. It was to a group of pilots at an RAF field at the height of the Battle of Britain. He told them, who, if not you, when, if not now? 450 RAF fighters were destroyed, 103 pilots killed, 128 wounded. 25% of RAF fighter command was wiped out. Group Captain Peter Townsend believed that on September 6, 1940, victory was within the grasp of the German Luftwaffe. On September 7th, he said, the Wehrmach divisions, panzers, artillery could have begun a massive invasion of British soil that day. The Germans, however, had also lost 385 aircraft. A few more weeks of this, Winston Churchill said, Britain would have no more organized defense of the skies. A successful British invasion was a very strong possibility. And now we move to the third phase of the Battle of Britain, which I call the miracle of the Battle of Britain. On August the 24th, 1940, some German bombers who were supposed to bomb aircraft factories and oil tanks on the outskirts of London lost their way and instead dropped bombs on the center of the city. Well, here's one bomb, as you see, inscribed for Winston. The British thought it was deliberate, and they sought retaliation. So on August 24th and 29th, the RAF Bomber Command conducted the first night bombing of Berlin by 81 British planes. Here's some of the damage. The Berliners were stunned. Göring had promised that no enemy could reach their city. In fact, Göring said, if they ever do, you can call me Meyer. Many of them did for the rest of the war, because Berlin was bombed till it was rubble. Göring and Hitler were absolutely outraged. On September 4th, Hitler addressed the German people. In England, they are filled with curiosity and keep asking, why doesn't he come? Be calm. He is coming. He is coming. Just now, Mr. Churchill is demonstrating his new brainchild, the night air raid. When they declare that they will increase their attacks on our cities, we will raise their cities to the ground. When the RAF drops 2 or 3 or 4,000 kilograms of bombs, we in one night will drop 150, 250, 400,000 kilograms. The hour will come when one of us will break, and it will not be socialist Germany. Then Hitler made one of the biggest mistakes of the entire war. Hitler ordered Göring to shift from pulverizing the RAF airfields to the terror bombing of London. Here's a picture of a German plane over the Thames in central London. On a clear afternoon of September the 7th, Göring and Kesselring stood again on the channel at the coast. 3 Luftwaffe air fleets, 1,000 aircraft, crossed the channel and headed for London, the largest city then in the world. It was an awesome spectacle. This enormous armada spread over 800 square miles of air and shutting out the sun rose nearly to the height of 2 miles. London began enduring massive German air raids for 57 continuous nights. The raids would frequently occur until the end of 1940. Even Buckingham Palace was hit. Here is Churchill seeing some of the rubble. By the end of September 1940, though people sought shelter in the London Tube, 436 people had died, over 1,600 seriously injured. But from a strategic standpoint, September 15th, 1940 was the decisive day of victory for the British in the Battle of Britain. The Germans attacked with 1,700 aircraft. 4% of that force was shot down. They could not sustain so great a loss for the invasion, and they realized the invasion would have to be postponed. Hitler always doubted whether or not they would actually succeed in defeating the British Air Force. He was very reluctant to launch an invasion, and now he said he would delay the invasion until the spring of 1941. Of course, remember, in June of 1941, he attacked the Soviet Union. From October 1st to October 30th, sporadic German attacks continued, but Hitler had canceled Operation Sea Lion on October 10th. Here is the final tally. As you see, the German losses were double that of the British. Churchill said it best in his memorial speech to the House of Commons when he stated, "Never in the field of human conflict has so much been owed by so many to so very few." Many young British died in the Battle of Britain defending the skies of their country, but also many others from countries that had been overrun or from other parts of the British Empire, from the United States, from Northern Ireland. 600 non-British personnel flew as pilots in the Battle of Britain. So here were those few. In November of 1940, the Blitz started. Coventry, England. Hitler sent 500 bombers one night, destroyed 2,300 buildings. Here's the cathedral ruins. 45,000 others damaged. London, the bombing of December 29th, 1940, is called the Second Great Fire of London. 1,500 fires. The Blitz would continue until May of 1941, because in June, the Germans invaded Russia. But from September 1940 until May of 1941, the Germans dropped 200,000 tons of bombs on the United Kingdom. 45,000 civilians died. Of that, 5,600 were children, and 200,000 other civilians were injured. However, I will note that the French had greater losses from bombing in the Second World War than the Brits. And most of those bombs we dropped to prepare for D-Day. The German losses continued to mount during this entire time. The Luftwaffe never would recover in pilots and plane losses for the rest of the war. With Hitler, the invasion of Russia in 1941, a two-front war would begin in Europe. And then, after the loss of North Africa and the invasion of Italy, a three-front war. The bombing of the United Kingdom greatly subsided, though it continued through the rest of the war with the V-1 and V-2 rocket attacks. And those attacks lasted until March of 1945. The war ended in May. Today, you can go and see the RAF Bomber Museum and the Battle of Britain Museum near London. Also, you can visit the Imperial War Museum's Battle of Britain Museum and the 1940 Operations Room at Duxford, which is near Cambridge, England. There are actually 5 museums at Duxford. I saw 2 of them the last time I was there. One is a general aviation museum where they have a Concorde and they have other aircraft from all over the world. Nearby, of course, is Cambridge, and nearby also is the cemetery where the personnel of the 8th Air Force are buried. They have a beautiful chapel in there with, on the ceiling of the chapel, a painting of the bombers going to Germany, and with them are flying angels with them. It's very moving. The Brits won the Battle of Britain, which was really the first major defeat that Hitler suffered in the Second World War. It set the stage for final victory because it would give the Brits and the United States and the French allies, the Free French, a platform from which to launch that invasion. First, the bombing campaign, and then D-Day. The United States owes a great deal to the British people and a mighty thank you for standing alone in 1940 to stop Hitler and his triumphant march across Europe. If the Brits had surrendered, the war would have gone on much, much longer. So I salute the Brits today on the 80th anniversary of their great victory. And I thank you for your attention tonight and giving you the big picture of how not just America won the Second World War, but the British were our faithful allies from the beginning, before we were even there, until the bitter end. All right, now I think we can go to questions, right?
Okay, it looks like we've got a question in the chat. I'm actually gonna, because we're a small group, I'm gonna unmute everybody so you can ask your questions directly. But I do want to get to the one that's in chat. Larry asks you to please talk about the Eagle Squadron.
I'm sorry, the what squadron?
Eagle Squadron.
The Eagle Squadron. Well, I know of Eagle Day, but I can't really tell you anything about the Eagle Squadron. I'm sorry.
Okay.
What maybe
Sorry,
maybe Larry can tell me about the Eagle Squadron.
Larry?
I can indeed. There were a group of Americans that learned to fly mostly in Canada before the US got into the war, and then were transferred to England and flew fighter planes during the Battle of Britain. They were among the few that Churchill referred to. When the US got into the war, they were put together in en masse, transferred to the US, what was then the Army Air Corps. They then continued to wear their British wings, which were made of fabric. They sewed them over the right side underneath the pockets on their jackets, and wore it rather as a badge of honor.
Of course, remember in 1940, the America First Committee and the German-American Bund were very active in trying to prevent the United States from entering the Second World War. And even though Roosevelt had started the first peacetime draft and had actually begun a rearmament of the Navy, the Air Force, and the Army in 1940, most Americans still did not want to go to war in Europe. And unless Pearl Harbor had occurred, we would not have entered the war at that time. The interesting thing that most people don't know is that when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December the 7th, a few days later, Hitler, in one of the few instances in the entire war, declared war on the United States. He didn't have to do it. The Tripartite Axis Agreement did not require him to do this. And that's when, of course, Churchill was elated, because now the United States would not devote all of its resources and attention to attacking the Japanese, but at Christmas of 1941, after Pearl Harbor, Churchill had flown to Washington, D.C. and spent several weeks with Roosevelt and the American High Command. And they all agreed that once, now that they were in it, that the priority first would be the defeat of Germany. So those men that went there in 1940 were very brave. And many of the people back in the United States were not happy they were there, but they certainly helped the British to win this great victory, and they should be applauded for it. Other questions? Maybe I can answer something. Any other questions? Comments? How many of you have been to England? Raise your hand.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
How many of you want to go in, well, after COVID is history, and go from Dover? Now, David Ramsey, my co-author of Divided on D-Day, his father was Admiral Bertram Ramsey, and his headquarters were in that cliff overlooking Dover. And we're going to go there and see that. And we're going to go to Cambridge and see the university, go to that museum, and actually spend, I think, more than one day, because there are 5 museums there. We'll go to the airfield. I might get you into the Churchill archives like I did last time. Churchill College is right there. And in London, there are many sites. And go also down to Portsmouth, where they launched the invasion. And we can go into the actual headquarters of SHAEF, and they have the maps on the wall that show where the invasion was launched. It's on a British base, but you can set up permission to go inside. And we can also stand on the deck of Nelson's flagship, the Victory, which he won Trafalgar. So
Yes.
we can see a lot of different things. And I also have some other surprises in store for you. So think about that. Hopefully we'll pull it off. Just, we have to make sure we're not attacked by any more viruses, right? Yeah, really. Any other questions? Well, I want to thank you very much for your attention, and I hope to do another program. I hope you all enjoyed it.
We
Thank you.
did very much. Thank you so much for
You're very
coming and
welcome.
joining us.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks
And,
again.
Brings tears to our eyes.
And stay healthy, wear your mask, social distance, take precautions. You're all my friends, and I want to see you again for a long time.
You
Okay.
do the
All
same.
right. Thank you.
so much. Good night, all.
Bye.
All right.